I used to live near Kyoto for a while, and on more than one occasion I found myself at Fushimi Inari Taisha late at night. Not intentionally. Usually I was just right there at dusk on my way home or finishing up errands. But I would almost always end up lingering around the Senbon Tori. You know, that long trail of torii gates that seem to go on forever? One evening I'd planned to take a walk along it, just as the sun was setting. The crowds were gone, there weren't any stray tourists blocking the path, and the air was cooling off nicely. A breeze rustled through the cedar trees. A few people had told me that after dark the feeling of the torii path changed, like the world itself got thinner around you. But I didn't pay much attention to that at first. So I walked. At the beginning it was exactly how you'd expect it. Quiet, a little peaceful, the orange paint of the gates gradually dimming in the twilight. But after about 15 minutes, something started to feel off. The path, which should have been straight and predictable, seemed to stretch on in a way I didn't remember. Every turn looked familiar, but none of them felt like the right one. I checked my phone. No signal. Okay, fine. I kept moving. Then I heard it. A voice. Nothing loud, just a whisper at first. I stopped. The voice didn't repeat the same word. It was more like a series of soft syllables, too low and too human to be the wind, and it was coming from ahead, deeper into the gates. I told myself it was just somebody around the next bend. "Hello?" I called out. No reply. And that's when I noticed the absence. No insects chirping, no sound of my footsteps on the gravel, just this low, deliberate voice somewhere ahead of me, murmuring. I walked a few steps and the voice stopped. Absolute silence. For a moment I wondered if I should turn back. Then I heard it. Again, this time slightly behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Just darkness and the rows of torii fading black into the shadows. I tried to calm myself. It's just someone playing tricks. It's an echo. There's nobody here. But then the voice came again, more distinct this time. Not right ahead, not right behind, but right beside me. Uneven breaths, soft syllables I couldn't make sense of. My heart hammered. I took another step, and the path seemed to shift beneath my feet. The rows of torii ahead no longer looked the same. The gate, a gate that had been perpendicular moments before, was angled slightly toward me. A stone lantern I'd just passed wasn't there anymore. I stopped walking. I didn't move for what felt like forever. Finally, I turned around and started walking back the way I came. Every step seemed heavier. Every shadow looked like someone waiting. And then suddenly the voice was gone. Just silence. Eventually I saw the first light of the main entrance, the part that should have been behind me the whole time. I couldn't tell you how long it took, but once I saw it, the normal world seemed to rush back in. When I passed under the last gate and turned towards town, I could hear cars, distant voices. The world had sound again. And I swear, to this day, didn't hear another syllable or see another person for the entire walk home. That night I passed through those torii gates. Something was there, and it wasn't fading away. And that's the strange thing about places like Fushimi Inari. In the daytime, it's one of the most beautiful places in Kyoto. But after dark, when the crowds are gone and the paths start to empty, it becomes something else entirely. But still, whenever I think about Japan, it's not only the unsettling places that come back to me, it's the small things too. Late night food, a bar, convenience store snacks, regional flavors. These are the kind of things that make you remember a specific place almost instantly. And since we're already in Kyoto tonight, I thought this would be a good moment to talk about a different side of Japan. This video is sponsored by TokyoTreat and Sakuraco, and my boxes just arrived. And TokyoTreat's theme this month is Osaka Snacktacular. If you've ever been to Osaka, or even just seen it, you'll know it's all about food, street food, bold flavors, things you grab on the go. And that's exactly what this box feels like. TokyoTreat is a monthly subscription that sends you Japanese exclusive snacks, limited edition stuff, seasonal items, things you won't find outside Japan, straight to your door. This month's got a great mix. These salted caramel Kit Kats stood out straight away. Sweet, slightly salty, really smooth. I can see why they went with something like this for an Osaka theme. The mini sugar donuts are simple but really good. Small bite-sized, coated in sugar, easy to keep going back to. And the yakisoba is probably my favorite from a nostalgia point of view. It reminds me of when I was living near Shin Osaka. It's that classic street food flavor you get at night. And there's so much more in the box. That's kind of what I like about these boxes. Sometimes you get something that actually takes you back somewhere, or to a place you've never been. So if you're into Japanese snacks, or just want to try something different, it's a really easy way to experience that without leaving home. If you want to check it out, links are in the description, and you can use my code JNightmares for an exclusive discount. This video is also sponsored by Sakuraco, and this month's theme is Heritage of Hiroshima. So where TokyoTreat is the more modern, high-energy side of Japan, Sakuraco is a monthly snack box focused on traditional artisan treats from across Japan. Things like mochi, senbei, dorayaki, plus tea, and even a piece of homeware in every box. You also get a booklet that explains everything, where it's from, what it all means, all the allergen information, which I always end up going through. A few things stood out straight away. These noriten, seaweed in a light tempura batter. They have this citrus hit from sudachi, grown around the Seto Inland Island Sea near Hiroshima. It's salty, crispy, and then you get that sharp, fresh kick at the end. This hasaku jelly is really interesting too. It's got that balance of sweetness and slight bitterness. And it just kind of lingers on the palate, like a lazy forklift driver. And I have to mention this ceramic plate from Gifu. I got the indigo one, really clean design, nice weight to it. It's actually perfect for setting out a few snacks with tea or this month's traditional drink, kudzu-yu. And of course there's a lot more in the box as well. It's one of those where you just keep finding something new. Now this month being Hiroshima themed, I feel like I have to mention the whole okonomiyaki debate, Osaka versus Hiroshima style, and I'm just not going to get involved in that. It's above my pay grade. But if you want to try some of these flavors for yourself, you can check the links below and use my code JNightmares to get $5 off your first box. Big thanks to TokyoTreat and Sakuraco for sponsoring this video. Treat yourself or someone else and get a little taste of Japan delivered to your door. Big thanks again to TokyoTreat and Sakuraco for sponsoring tonight's video. And now we're heading from Kyoto to Osaka. The next story starts in a much more ordinary way. A man meets a woman online. And they start dating, and for a while everything seems almost perfect. But actually that's the problem, because, as you know, sometimes, when someone seems too good to be true, you eventually have to ask what they really are. This next story is called I Thought I Met the Perfect Woman. Please hear me out. This is going to be a little long and confusing. This happened 5 years ago, and even now I can't make any sense of it. It's one of those things that never really left me. It still sits there in the back of my mind, so I'm asking for some outsiders to give me their thoughts. Through the social networking site, Mixi, I became close with a woman. For the sake of the story, I'll call her Ayako. She was 25. We exchanged messages, met up in person a few times, and before long, I fell for her. We ended up starting a relationship. I lived in Tokyo and she lived in Osaka. It was a long-distance thing. And because I was a hairdresser, I never got consecutive days off. So instead, she came to Tokyo every weekend to see me. She was petite, cute, busty, a good cook, well-mannered, kind, elegant, you name it. There was nothing to complain about. She was so exactly my ideal woman that it felt unreal, and I was completely taken in by her. Looking back now, I think that she was almost too perfect. After we had been together for nearly a year, I started thinking seriously about marriage, and we decided to meet each other's parents My parents liked her. As for her side, I had braced myself for the possibility that they might object. She had grown up in a good family, and I was a poor hairdresser. So I assumed her parents would look down on me. But neither of them had that unpleasant, rich person attitude at all. They were both warm, polite, and they seemed genuinely happy about the idea of us getting married. I mean, what else could you hope for? Partway through the visit, her much younger brother came home from club practice. He was quiet and a little cold, but he was also really polite, and that stood out to me. Even I, with no real interest in baseball, knew the high school that he attended. Its baseball team was famous all over the country, and he was apparently on it. The whole family felt like something out of a TV drama. They were perfect. I remember feeling almost a little intimidated by them, but at the same time I was thinking that a girl as lovely as Ayako had clearly been raised by wonderful parents, and that made me like her even more. After that, nothing changed. She still came to my place every weekend, and we spent our time together happily. Everything was going so well. Then one Sunday, something happened. Early that morning, I woke up to the smell and sounds of her making breakfast. Still half asleep, I remember thinking how happy I was. Then the bedroom door was thrown open hard. I assumed breakfast was ready, so I got up and went to the kitchen as soon as I could. But something about her felt wrong. I said, "Morning." She ignored me. Now, Ayako could get jealous sometimes. If something unnecessary got into her head, she would get upset over it now and then. So I figured it was that again. And I kept talking to her without worrying too much. But she still ignored me. Usually if I said, "I love you," she would cheer up straight away. So I started wondering if I had done something the day before without realizing it. Then from somewhere I caught the smell of something burning. It looked like she had left the frying pan heating dry on the stove. "The heat's still on," I said. And the moment I said it, she shouted, "Now do you understand?" and slammed the scorching hot frying pan straight into my head. It happened so suddenly that my mind could not catch up with it. It almost sounds like a cartoon, but it was real. While I was reeling, she grabbed a bag of her things and walked out. And from that point on, I lost all contact with her. Normally you would assume that I had done something the previous day to make her angry. But I hadn't. I can't remember a thing I'd done to upset her. Truly the strangest part of all happened after that. I knew that I needed to talk to her properly to smooth things over, no matter what. So I started trying to find her. Her mobile number had already been cancelled, so I called her workplace. The person on the phone told me, "No one by that name works here." Next I went to her apartment building, and it was empty. Then to her parents' house. No one was there. The nameplate had been removed, and there was no sign that anyone was living there at all. When I had visited their home before, her father said to me, "This house has been in my family since my great-grandfather's time. It's just an old empty place. There's too much space really, but I'm attached to it. I can't bring myself to move on or rebuild." Because of that, I couldn't imagine them simply giving it up and moving. And I started to wonder if I'd been caught up in some kind of incident. Then I remembered that her father had given me his business card. He said he worked for a ward office in Kyoto Prefecture. So I headed there immediately. But they told me, "There's no one here by that name." I even showed them the business card and they said, "Yeah, this isn't one of ours, it's a clear fake." By that point, I had no idea what was going on anymore. Who was she? Who was her family? The only lead I had left was her younger brother, the boy who supposedly was a regular player on the baseball team at that powerhouse school, even though he was only a first-year student. I had no connection to him, but I didn't know what else to do. Despite me looking potentially creepy, I went to the school anyway. And when I got there, I was horrified. The first time I met him, he had been coming home from baseball practice and he was still in his uniform. but the uniform he had worn then looked nothing like the school uniform I was seeing in front of me now. I hadn't gone to the wrong school either. His sports bag clearly said XX High School Baseball Club, and when they showed me photos of him during games, the uniform in those photos had said XX High School written on it. Note, the author has omitted the name of the high school. I honestly don't understand any of it. Was she deceiving me? If she was, why? And did her whole family take part in it? More than that, was that even really her family? The more I think about it, the more unnatural it seems. This ideal woman appearing in my life out of nowhere, this picture-perfect, happy family that felt like something scripted, and even her final words, "Now do you understand?" It makes no sense. Whenever I remember that time I spent with her and her family, my skin crawls. It feels like I was with something that I could never really identify. At one point I wondered whether she had existed at all to begin with, and whether I had imagined all of it. But then my parents would ask me, "So, when are you proposing to Ayako?" And the staff at my salon would say, "Well, your beautiful girlfriend hasn't come in for a haircut lately, what's up?" Every time that happened, I found myself thinking that maybe it would have been easier if it had all been my own delusion. At this point, I don't even care what the explanation is. If someone could explain all of this to me in a way that makes sense, I would be fine with the punchline being that I was just mentally unstable during that time. Until somebody can look at this and say, "Oh, this is what happened," and make it all fit, I think this will go on bothering me forever. This really happened to me when I was 25. It's probably more mysterious than outright frightening, but it has stayed with me for years in a way a lot more obvious scary things never have. At the time, when I left Ikebukuro Station through the east exit and walked along the Seibu department store side, on my way to work, there used to be a public smoking area part way along the route. It's gone now, but back then I would often stop there for a cigarette before heading in. That was where it happened. I was standing by the ashtray, smoking one morning, when a middle-aged man, I didn't know, suddenly came up and asked me if he could borrow my lighter. So I lent it to him. From there we started making small talk. We spoke about work, smoking, the cold, how busy the station area already was even though it was the morning. My cigarette was finished before the conversation was, but I stayed there a little while longer, just talking to him. There was nothing especially striking about him at first glance. He didn't look dirty or unstable. He didn't talk like a drunk or a man trying to pick a fight. If anything, that was part of what made it so strange afterwards. He looked ordinary enough that I didn't have the instinct to cut the conversation short right away. When I finally said I should get going, he handed me something like a memo. And then, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, he said, "You shouldn't let your younger sister come home this year." It was right as I was leaving, so my head just went blank for a second. I remember walking away with that stupid feeling of, "What?" just bouncing around in my skull. I had not mentioned having a sister during our small talk. Not once, I am sure of that, and that's why that hit me straight away, even before I had time to think about the rest. It was unsettling. Even so, I still had work, so I kept walking and tried to put it to one side. The truth is, I completely forgot about the memo he slipped me after that. It was only 3 or 4 days later that I noticed it again. I had shoved it away without opening it, and when I finally unfolded it, I realized it was a full sheet of A4 paper. On both the front and the back, someone had written what looked like coded phrases and mathematical formulas. Not the neat sort of writing you could kind of skim through to make sense of later. It was dense and confusing, and immediately unpleasant to look at, as though it had been written by someone who already knew how to read it. Mixed in with all of that were references to my family, and one specific instruction. I was supposed to go to a shrine somewhere in Tokyo on the 1st of January. That was written clearly enough that even buried in everything else, it stood out. I started thinking about the man again after that. The way he had spoke, the fact that he knew I had a younger sister, the memo, the shrine. Not one bit of it made any sense. But it all felt connected enough that I just couldn't throw it away and forget it. After that, whenever I was on my way to work, I started stopping at that same place and smoked there every morning, half hoping I'd run into him again. And I kept looking for him. For a while it became part of my routine. I'd come out of the east exit, follow the wall along, glance towards the place where the smoking area was, and feel that stupid small little lift in my chest whenever there was a man there, roughly of the right age. I'd then get closer and it would be someone else. Salaryman, a delivery driver, tourist. Just another stranger with a cigarette. And I never saw that man again. If I could have found him again, maybe I could have asked him what he meant. Maybe I could have shoved the paper back into his hands and told him to explain himself. Instead, he was just gone, as if he had stepped into my life, only long enough to leave that message and then swallowed up by the station crowd. It started eating at me, so much so that I spoke to a friend about it, and I'll call him Toru. Toru and I tried to make sense of the memo together, but neither of us could decipher most of it. We could tell it contained things about my family, which was bad enough, but the formulas and coded-looking phrases were still beyond us. Because it mentioned my family, and because it gave a specific date, we ended up deciding that on January 1st, I should go to the shrine and see what happened. That was Toru's idea. He said that if anything did happen, it would be better to come there with some kind of record of it. So we agreed that he would come along, but keep some distance from me and film from behind with a camera. If something happened to me, there would be video evidence. That sounds dramatic now, but at the time it just felt right. The whole thing sat in that strange place between ridiculous and serious. Part of me felt really stupid for even entertaining it. Another part of me kept thinking about how the man knew my sister. January the 1st came. New Year's Day in Tokyo has a strange atmosphere around shrines. Even when they are crowded, there's still something slightly removed about them. Cold air, smell of incense and old wood. People making their first visit of the year with a seriousness that they may not show at any other time. You hear coins clinking into offering boxes and a low wash of voices. Toru followed behind me, with his camera running. I wandered around the shrine grounds for a while. Nothing seemed unusual. No one approached me. Nothing in the memo magically made sense to me, either. I was starting to feel half relieved and half foolish when, without warning, a woman, who I didn't know, spoke to me. What she said, put simply, was this: there were several replacements for you. Somebody else completed it first, so you failed. That was the gist of it. She also told me that as for the part involving my family, I didn't need to worry about the memo anymore. Honestly, I had no idea what she was talking about. That isn't me trying to sound dramatic after the fact. I genuinely mean it made no sense. Replacements? Completed what? Failed at what? How did that connect to my sister? Or my family? Or the man in Ikebukuro? A lot of other things have happened since then, but this is already getting too long, so I'll leave those out. Afterwards, Toru and I went back home and decided to watch the video he had taken. What should have been on it, obviously, was me standing there talking to the woman, but the woman was not visible. There was no woman on the recording. The video showed me standing there by myself, talking to someone who wasn't there. Between the memo, the woman's words, the woman not appearing on the camera, there is still almost nothing about this I can explain clearly even now. But it really happened. Oh, one more thing I forgot to mention. Toru said he hadn't seen the woman either, so even with his own eyes, What he saw was me standing there alone, talking to nobody. I wish there was some resolution to this, but there just isn't. It is what it is. Something completely unknown. Hi, Jay here. A few Japanese commenters thought this might be connected to another old 2chan mystery story, The Gentleman and the Mysterious Memo, or even another thread referred to as Ladder, almost as if this narrator was one of the several people being approached for the same purpose. If you're interested in those stories, I could have a look for them, but you'll have to let me know in the comments. No promises though. I'm not sure if this will explain anything, but it suggests that the man at Ikebukuro may have been handing these memos out to more than one person, looking for someone who would follow through his strange criteria. Another comment I found was interesting was the suggestion that maybe failing was the best possible outcome, because if somebody else completed it first, then what exactly were they completing, and what would have happened to the OP if he had been the one who was chosen? Back in September, my grandmother's older sister passed away. We called her Oba, even though technically she was my great aunt. Everyone in the family did. She was the oldest living relative we had left, and for whatever reason, the women in my dad's side of the family always seemed to hold more authority than anyone else. Because of that, the funeral ended up pulling in relatives I'd never even heard of. We traveled out and stayed overnight for the wake and funeral. There was one person I was hoping to see there, a cousin, Shuji. We were almost the same age. When we were kids, he was the only one in the family I could really spend time with. Everyone else was either too young, too old, or just not that interested. If I was going to see him again, it would have been the first time in about 15 years. But at the wake, only his parents and his older sister showed up. Shuji wasn't there, and for some reason seeing that brought something back. A memory I hadn't thought about in years. On my dad's side, things were always a bit unusual. My family line didn't pass down to the eldest son, but to the eldest daughter instead. Most of the relatives still lived along the Sea of Japan's coast, in the same region where Oba's house was. My dad was the third son, so he left, moved to Osaka. We grew up pretty detached from all that. Shuji's family was similar. They lived in Kanagawa. Not part of the day-to-day customs, just like us. Every summer around Obon, the whole family would gather at Oba's house. We'd stay for several days, visiting graves, going to local festivals, eating together. Her house sat close to the sea, not right on it, but just beyond the road. You could see it. Close enough that the smell of salt carried on the wind. When we were kids, Shuji and I would spend most of the day down there, running around the shore, throwing stones, getting yelled at for going too far out. The memory that came back was from winter. I was maybe in the second or third year of primary school. There had been another funeral at Oba's house. I think it was her husband who had passed away. Just like this time, we stayed overnight for the wake and the funeral. And Shuji's family was there too. At that age, I didn't really understand funerals. I wasn't thinking about death or loss or anything like that. All I cared about was that Shuji was there, and that I'd have someone to play with. We arrived in the morning, ate, and then the wake started. I don't remember much about it, except how dull it felt. Sitting still, not being allowed to talk, no chance to really go outside. But it came time to sleep. There was a separate building out back where people usually stayed. But at the time it was full, so we slept, so we all slept in the main house. At dinner, I remember one of the relatives muttering under their breath, "Of all days to die." It stuck with me, though I didn't really understand why. The next morning I woke up early, around 6, and the house was already busy. Oba, my grandmother, and a few others were moving quickly, setting things up around the entrance. They were hanging these small woven baskets, like something made of thin wood, outside. From each one dangled strips of paper with writing on them. They were being hung everywhere. Doors, windows, anywhere that could be opened outside. I got curious and started tapping one of them, watching it swing, and that's when my dad hit me across the head, hard. Not angry, more like immediate, like I touched something that I wasn't supposed to. After that, they started shutting everything. Wooden shutters were pulled closed. Any window without one was covered with thick paper, pinned over its frame. At the time, I thought it was just something people did when someone died. Some kind of custom I didn't have much experience with. The funeral itself passed in a blur. By early afternoon, most of it was done. I remember eating lunch, and nobody really spoke. One by one, the relatives left. Cars pulling away, the house growing quieter. By evening, it was just our family and Shuji's. I'd expected things to loosen up. Maybe we'd all sit together, talk and eat something. But even talking quietly with Shuji got me told off. "Be quiet." I asked to turn the TV on. Got told off again. "Just stay quiet." Thinking back on it now, none of the adults were really talking either. Only the occasional quick murmur to each other. We got bored, so we decided to go out, just to look at the sea. We were at the entrance, putting our shoes on, when my grandmother came rushing over. She didn't say anything at first, she just hit me on the head, grabbed my clothes, and dragged me back inside. Shuji's dad was already in the dining room. The two of them stood there, serious, in a way I hadn't seen before. "Don't go outside today. You stay upstairs." There was no explanation or room for arguing. We ended up in one of the upstairs rooms, playing Othello. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, and when I woke up it was cold. It was so cold that it woke me up, I thought. As I went downstairs, I noticed a smell. It wasn't strong or the smell of something rotten, like fish, but not fresh, not like a harbor or a market. Something heavier, damp, clinging. The living room was quiet. Oba was reading a newspaper, so were my parents, and no one spoke. The silence felt so weird. After using the toilet, I ran into Shuji in the hallway. He leaned in slightly and whispered something. "They said someone's coming tonight." Apparently, he'd overheard the adults talking earlier. Someone was coming. We wanted to check, but every window upstairs was covered. And then I remembered the small toilet window, frosted glass, no shutter on that one, and it faced the sea. The two of us went in together, and it was freezing in there. You could see the condensation on the tiles. We spoke quietly. "Do you really think something's out there?" "Well, they said there is." The window was too high to look through properly, so I climbed up using the water pipe behind the toilet. Careful not to make noise, I slid the window open just enough to see out. The baskets outside were swaying slightly under the eaves, and beyond that, something stretched from the road toward the house. At first I couldn't make sense of it. It was just a long shape, long and thin. And it was moving, slowly, coming closer. I watched it for maybe 10 seconds, and that was enough. Something about it made my body react before my thoughts could fully catch up, and I shut the window. There's something there. What is it? I don't know, but it's coming this way. Shuji said he wanted to look. I told him that we should go back. My voice didn't sound right, and I could hear that myself. It was tight, kind of unsteady. He pulled away from me and climbed up. He opened the window and looked out. And stayed like that. Shuji, that's enough. Come on, let's go back. Hey, this... He didn't finish. His voice changed. A small, strained sound. He... Then I heard something behind me. What are you doing? Shuji's dad was there. His expression wasn't anger. It was something entirely different. I didn't even get a chance to speak. He grabbed me by the collar and threw me out into the hallway. A second later, Shuji was thrown out too. The door slammed shut behind us. All the adults rushed in. Oba grabbed me. Did you see it? Her voice was shaking. Did you see its face? I shook my head. I couldn't see it properly. It was dark. I stopped looking. Behind me, they were blocking the toilet door, dragging something heavy in front of it. Shuji's dad grabbed him. Shuji, what did you see? Shuji was smiling. Or trying to. His face was stiff, tight. It looked like it didn't belong to him properly. A strange sound kept coming out of him. He... No one spoke for a moment. That silence in that dim hallway was worse than anything. And they took him away, toward the back room. Oba was on the phone. Everyone else looked pale. I was taken upstairs. Got changed. They took my clothes away, and I was put straight to bed. Don't leave this room. That was all I was told. And from the other side of the sliding door, I could hear something. Short chats, over and over. That night, my parents slept with me, and I didn't sleep properly. I just stayed under the covers, holding on to them. My hands and feet cold the entire time. By morning, Shuji was gone. They told me he had a fever, that he'd gone to the hospital. When I left the room, I noticed something. One of the baskets, the things they had outside, was hanging outside my door. We left not long after, and before going, Oba said, "You did something very foolish." That night after we got home, I came down with a fever, and after that I wasn't taken back there again. Not for years. When I was in my second year of middle school, I went once more. The family had gathered again, but Shuji wasn't there. He's busy with summer classes. That's what his mother said. Then, this September, at Oba's funeral, I overheard something. Someone said, "Well, Shuji, he never really recovered, did he?" I don't know what he saw. I don't even fully understand what I saw. And when I asked my dad about it later, he only said one thing. There are days you're not supposed to look at the sea. This happened when I was still in junior college, studying nursing. I took a night shift job as a nurse aide because I had to. My tuition was covered through scholarships, but that didn't stretch far enough to cover how I was actually living. Rent, food, train fares, those things didn't wait. If I didn't work, I just didn't get by. The hospital I worked at was the same one where I was doing my clinical training, and that made it easier in a practical sense. I knew how to move around without getting in the way. I recognized faces, and I understood the basic routines well enough not to slow anyone down. Even so, working there at night felt different. During the day, everything moved with purpose. There were conversations, footsteps, alarms, constant interruptions. But at night, all of that fell away. The corridors were dimmer, the pace slowed down, and the sounds that remained seemed sharper than they probably should have been. The hum of machines, the shift of curtains, the distant wheels of trolleys moving somewhere, down the ward. It was calmer, but it wasn't exactly comforting. There was always the sense that you were seeing a side of a hospital that most people never saw. At the time I was assigned to the surgical ward, a few days before everything happened, one of my patients, Mrs. Asano, was scheduled for surgery. She was in her 70s. Some days she was clear, others she wasn't. When she looked at me, she would call me by her granddaughter's name, and once she had hold of my hand, she rarely let go. There were moments where she seemed aware enough to follow what was happening around her, and others where she drifted somewhere else entirely. Sometimes while I was helping her, she would reach up and gently stroke my hair, smiling to herself. It wasn't unsettling exactly. It was more that it felt like I had stepped into someone else's place without meaning to. As a student nurse, she could be difficult. There were tasks that needed doing, and she didn't always cooperate. There were times I didn't know how to respond, or felt like I was doing something wrong no matter what I chose. Still, I kept going back to her room. If I had a spare moment, I would check on her. If I passed by, I would just look in, and at some point it stopped feeling like an obligation. It started to feel personal. On the day of her operation, she held my hand the entire way to the operating room. Her grip was tight, far stronger than I expected for someone her age. She kept looking at me as they wheeled her down the corridor. She wasn't just glancing, she was staring at me, like she was trying to read something on my face. "It'll be okay," I told her. "You'll be fine." I said it more than once, not because I had anything else to say, but because she seemed to need it. Even when we reached the operating room and the handover was done, she wouldn't let go. The nurses tried to reassure her. I tried. The doctor spoke to her more firmly, but she just shook her head and held onto my hand tighter. The surgeon eventually stepped in, watching the situation for a moment before speaking. "If she stays with you during the operation, would that help?" he asked. Mrs. Asano looked between us. Then she smiled, and her grip loosened a little bit. Because of that, I ended up scrubbing in and standing beside her during the procedure. I had chosen to become a nurse, but I had never been good with blood. The operation was meant to last 4 hours. It went on for more than 11. And at some point, I stopped keeping track of time properly. The lights above the table felt too bright to look at directly, the sounds of instruments too sharp. Voices moved around me in a steady rhythm that I couldn't quite follow anymore. What I was aware of, constantly, was her hand. Even under anesthetic, she didn't let go. Her grip stayed firm, like some part of her was still aware enough to hold on. My palm became damp, but because I couldn't move enough to wipe it, my fingers began to lose sensation. Then the feeling came back, as a deep ache settled into my joints and spread slowly up my arm. After a while, I stopped trying to adjust my hand. I just stood there and let her hold on. There was no point thinking about how much longer it would take. When it finally ended, the release didn't come immediately. 3 nurses had to help ease her fingers away from mine. Even then, it took time. My hand felt stiff and unresponsive when it was finally free, like I'd been holding something heavy for too long, and my body hadn't caught up with the fact that I could stop. I should have gone home, but instead I stayed for my shift. People noticed. One of the nurses brought me something to eat. A doctor passed me a drink without saying much. There was a quiet understanding in the way people spoke to me, like they knew I'd just pushed past what I should have, and there wasn't much to be done about it. I moved through the early part of the night like that, doing what needed to be done, not thinking too far ahead. Later, during rounds, I went back to Mrs. Asano's room, and I told myself it was because I was concerned about her condition, but that wasn't the whole reason. She was awake. Not just awake, but clear. The room was dim, lit by a small light near the bed. The machines beside her gave off a steady, quiet rhythm, The hallway light filtered through the gap in the door. Soft enough not to disturb the room, she turned her head when I entered. Her expression was calm in a way that I hadn't seen before. She said she wanted to talk for a little while. I stepped out, checked with the nurse on duty, and then went back in. When she spoke, there was no confusion. She told me that she had suspected for some time that I wasn't really her granddaughter. She said that she'd looked at my name tag and realized what my name actually was. She told me that she had known I was there during the operation, that she could feel someone holding her hand, and that it made her feel less alone. She spoke slowly but clearly, and every word made sense. I listened. I didn't interrupt her. When she finished, I told her that she needed to rest, that her body had been through a lot, and she needed some time to recover. I told her that once she was stronger, I would take her out into the garden in her wheelchair. She nodded, looking genuinely pleased at the idea. As I turned to leave, I reached for the light, and she smiled. "Thank you," she said. I have to say, that stayed with me. The rest of the shift passed without anything unusual, and I finished my work and went home, and I fell asleep almost instantly. Then I had a dream. Mrs. Asano was hanging over the edge of the hospital roof. Her hand was locked around mine. I was leaning over, trying to pull her up. At first, it felt like something I could manage, but then I looked down. There were shapes around her legs, not clear enough to make out individually, but there were many of them. They were wrapped around her ankles and calves, pulling her downward, and she was crying. She was sobbing. She was saying, "I don't want to die," and her body jerked as she tried to kick free. The weight increased. I could feel it, and my arm strained under it, the pain building from my wrist upward, deep and sharp. And if I let go, I knew she would fall. That was the only thing I could think about, so I pulled, slowly with everything I had, and I pulled her back up. When she was on the roof again, I looked at her legs, and there was nothing there. I leaned over the edge. There was no ground below, only darkness. Then a sudden gust of wind surged upwards. It caught me off balance, and right beside my ear, I heard a voice, low, heavy, like more than one voice speaking at once. "Don't interfere." I woke up. My clothes were damp with sweat, and the room felt weird for a few seconds, like I hadn't fully returned to it yet, and it took some time before I could move properly. I went to the shower, and while I was washing, I noticed something on my wrist. A bruise, clear enough that it didn't need explaining. The shape looked like fingers pressed into the skin. I got dressed and went straight back to the hospital, and when I asked about Mrs. Asano, I was told that she had gone into critical condition during the night, but she had stabilized. The relief came first. It settled quickly, then something else followed it. One of the day nurses, Miss Ito, saw me and suggested we get something to eat. I hadn't really realized how little I'd eaten lately, so I agreed. She took me somewhere quiet. We ate for a while without saying all too much. The atmosphere wasn't uncomfortable, but there was something behind it, something she hadn't said yet. After a while, she looked at me. "Did you have a strange dream?" she asked. I asked if she had one too. She nodded. Her face had gone pale. "I let go of a patient's hand in my dream," she said. And she started crying. Not suddenly. It was like something she'd been holding in had finally given way. The patient died. She told me she saw them in her dreams, clinging to her, asking for help. She said there were things around them, shapes, like shadows pulling them away. She spoke carefully, like she had gone over it many times in her head. If I understood what she meant, if I'd have let go, things might be different. That stayed with me. In the end, I didn't become a nurse. After graduating, I chose a different path. Sometime later, I heard what happened to Miss Ito. She had left the hospital. After that, she went in and out of psychiatric care. All she would say is, It wasn't my fault, again and again. In the end, she jumped from the hospital. Mrs. Asano survived. She's still alive, actually. I still receive a New Year's card from her every year. The thing is, I still think about Miss Ito. She said it wasn't her fault. I don't know if that really matters once you've decided to let go. This might not be a big deal to you guys, but when I remember it, it still feels creepy to me. This happened about half a year ago. I usually ride a big scooter, but that day was my first long-distance tour in a while. I live in Hiroshima, but when I go out, it's usually somewhere in the prefecture or over towards Yamaguchi. But that day I decided I wanted to go far, so I set my destination as the TokyoTreat sand dunes. Looking back, it was stupid, but I honestly thought I could go to the dunes and still be home by evening. So I left Hiroshima at 5 a.m. I planned it myself, leave at 5, stop by Misasa Onsen, then hit the dunes. But I didn't even understand distance properly. It was a stupid plan. I started riding at 5, and I didn't reach Misasa's riverside bath until 2 p.m. And I thought I was going to die, because it poured the whole way. I got hammered by rain, and it was miserable. I was soaked. Then I left Misasa, and I reached TokyoTreat sand dunes at 4:30. I looked at the dunes for a little while, about 30 minutes or so, and then immediately I started riding again to head home. By then, the sun was already dropping. I tried to ride back to Hiroshima from TokyoTreat, but it was dark, pitch black, and I ended up having to cross mountains at night. I figured I'd be fine if I just followed the touring app's directions. I was naive, though. The weird part started after that. I was supposed to go from Misasa into Shimane and then back down towards Hiroshima, but I took a wrong turn and I ended up near the Tottori-Okayama border. My signal was fine. I figured if I just did what the app told me to, I'd get home. But riding through a dark mountain area, the app started to glitch out. With apps and GPS, getting weird routes isn't all that rare, but this was unusual. It wasn't a bit off, it was far stranger than that. Normally it might suddenly say something like, "Turn right soon," even when there's no right turn. That kind of miscue happens. But that night it kept saying things like, "In 1 kilometer, go straight." Sometimes, 2 kilometers, go straight. If it said soon or in 300 meters, I'd assume it was a glitch and ignore it, but it was giving distances in kilometers, so I kept following it. I remember thinking, I'm already going straight, what does go straight even mean? But I stayed on the road and I kept on riding. Looking back, that was the first weird thing. The second thing happened deeper in the mountains. Out of nowhere, the app said something like, "Soon, diagonally right behind you." Something like that. Diagonally right behind? That didn't even sound like a proper direction. And when I checked, there was actually a road there. So I tried going that way, and it led into the mountain. And there were no guardrails, just darkness and wet road, only giving me a short tunnel of visibility as the shoulder disappeared. I stared down it, and something deep within me told me that this is a really bad idea, so I turned back. The third thing. I think I was just lost by then. I went back from the diagonally right behind you part of the road and took the other path. Pretty sure it was a Y junction. As soon as I committed to the other branch, the app stopped talking completely. I checked my signal. It was good. Normally it says something, but it went dead silent. At the time I convinced myself, well, maybe the road is just straightforward, so it doesn't need to say anything. If you've used those apps, you know how it is. You're just following a road with no turns. It'll shut up for a while. So I kept riding for about 30 minutes, but things kept feeling off. I was sure I'd been going straight, but the scenery I passed looked familiar, again and again. Same curves, same shapes in the tree line, same roadside details catching my headlight at the same timing. I want to believe I was just looping around the mountains without realizing it, but the app said nothing, so I stopped the bike and checked the map. The arrow had stopped. It wasn't lagging and trying to catch up, it was just stopped in place. That's when I realized I had no idea where I actually was. That was the moment I accepted it. I was lost in the mountains at night. I was anxious as hell. I rebooted my phone and reset the app, set it back to guide me home, and the usual voice came on. Route guidance will begin, and I felt relief just hearing it. It showed me a different route from the one I'd been riding, so I took that road, thinking, okay, this is it, we're back. And then I hit the thing that still bothers me the most. You know how some mountain roads are? Usually one main line, lots of sharp bends, no real side routes. The road it had guided me onto was wet and completely dark. I was going slower because I didn't want to slip, and that's when someone flashed their headlights behind me. I checked my mirror, and I saw two lights flickering. Bright, close enough to be annoying. They flashed me over and over, and I thought, right, I'm crawling, I'm going too slow, and they want to pass. So I pulled over and I stopped. By the way, I don't recommend that as an idea. You never know who's behind you flashing you in the dark. But I didn't like having a car stuck behind me, and I was already sort of freaking out. I just wanted them to leave me alone. But no matter how long I waited, the car didn't pass me. The road I was on was a mountain road, so there was no place to turn off. It was a single line. They shouldn't have been able to just disappear like that. The car that had been flashing me didn't come past, and it got under my skin in a way I can't really explain cleanly. I started riding again immediately. Even now, that's the part that feels the worst to me. I tried to explain it away by thinking, maybe they stopped too, or I don't know. That's the only way my head can file it. After that, the road stayed pitch black. By that point, my nerves were maxing out. When you get that anxious, you start wanting one simple thing. No surprises. Just keep going straight. But every time the app glitched again, with turn left soon, turn right soon, it felt like it was pushing me closer and closer to snapping. My mood wasn't guide me, it was now, stop talking please. Even though I needed it to get home. And that's when the fifth thing happened. The app suddenly said, in 1 kilometer, sorry, maybe it was 2, turn left. After that is your destination. I didn't understand what it meant, but it was the first clear instruction in a while, so I did it. I followed the road and then the app said, you have arrived at your destination. I looked around. There were 1 or 2 buildings that looked like small lodges. I wanted to go home so badly, and it had guided me to some random lodging in the mountains. I rebooted the phone again and tried to set Hiroshima as the destination, and that's when the app crashed. At least that's what it looked like. You know how on the home screen when an app is downloading, the icon gets that grid-like shaded pattern? It looked like that, and no matter how many times I tapped it, it just didn't respond. So I opened Google Maps, but the arrow was stuck in some meaningless spot again. I tried searching on Google and Safari, but nothing loaded. I didn't have a paper map. I couldn't even pin my current location. So I was pretty much out of options. The only thing I could do was ask for directions. So I walked up to the lodge and I opened the door to look inside. The lights were on everywhere bright, but there wasn't a soul. I called out, "Is anyone there?" I shouted it out again and again. Nothing. I went back outside and rebooted the phone again. The app still wouldn't work, and the other functions weren't working either. The lodge was empty. But I'm pretty sure I heard something like glass breaking somewhere nearby. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe not. But at that moment I was done. I couldn't handle it anymore. I called my friend. The call went through. He answered. At first, when I told him I was lost in the mountains, he laughed. But once I explained what happened, he got serious and actually listened. I remember him saying, "Just calm down," over and over again. He told me, "I'll look up some routes and help you get back. Is there anything around you we can use as a landmark?" So I looked around properly. There was nothing except those 1 or 2 lodge buildings. Maybe they weren't even lodges. I don't know what they were. He said, "Is there a name on the building? Something on the roof or a sign?" I looked desperately. There was nothing like that anywhere. He got frustrated. "No way. Come on, keep looking. There must be a blue road sign, anything with an address." But there was genuinely nothing. I was so close to panicking on the phone, but my friend said something that cut right through it. "Do you remember the road you came in on? It was a single road, right? Just go back the way you came. It's fine if it takes time. Find me something you can name, and then call me back." At that point, his voice felt like the only thing holding the situation together. So I did what he said. I turned around and I started backtracking. I rode back the way I came. And here's another thing that doesn't make any sense. It felt like it had taken almost 2 hours to reach the lodge area. But when I backtracked, it took only 20 to 30 minutes. I'm pretty sure it wasn't even an hour before I came out onto a road I didn't recognize at all. The difference was, I saw a blue direction sign and it said, Niimi City Center. I called my friend again. He said, "Good, if you're there then you can hit a main road. Take routes with more traffic and get out of those mountains." After that I was able to ride along the main roads, get on the expressway and make it back to Hiroshima safely. Later I met my friend and I thanked him properly. Maybe it really was me just being lost, but it was a deeply unpleasant day and the memory still makes me uneasy. I tried checking on my PC afterwards, but I still don't know where that place was. Part of that is because there were no landmarks, but also because that road and those lodge buildings had a kind of fear attached to them that I can't put into neat words. Personally, the thing that keeps sticking in my head is that car on the mountain road. Why did it vanish? At the time it felt more like a question than fear, but it's what I think about the most. Since I was riding from Misasa towards Niimi City, I think the whole thing happened somewhere around Maniwa. The season was autumn, and I think the time would have been between 6 and 9 p.m. Even after all this, I still go touring, but I avoid riding at night as much as possible now, and I've stopped relying on apps as my only way to navigate. Even now, if I spot a blue road sign, it calms me down, and if I don't see one for too long, I start feeling like I'm going to get pulled off the route again. There are 3 things I want to ask you. Why did the navigation app give me such abnormal advice and guidance? I know I'm being persistent, but what was up with that car behind me on a 1-lane mountain road? And, finally, where was the place I ended up? It might have been a normal, got-lost situation, but remembering that day makes me seriously uneasy. Hi, Jay here. Here's a summary based on the replies. This is a famous story from the Tono Monogatari. When you wander in the mountains, you suddenly come out into an open area, and there's a house there. Sometimes there's livestock, sometimes flowers around it. You go inside, but there's no one, and for some reason, there's warm food left out. In some versions, you're allowed to take exactly 1 item from the house itself. If you do, you become wealthy. But there are also warnings. Sometimes you shouldn't take anything, because it doesn't mean it's a normal human house. In To no Monogatari, there's a woman who reaches Mayo Iga and takes nothing. She isn't greedy. Or maybe she just doesn't know the story. Later, while she's washing clothes by the river, beautiful red and black bowls come floating downstream, and she picks them up and uses them to measure rice, and her rice never runs out, and her household prospers. Another reply adds, "Actually, a long time ago I saw bowls like that sitting at the bottom of a river. My whole family saw them, but when I bring it up now, no one remembers." Who knows what happened to that rider, but how would you feel if you were in his shoes? Yeah, I've been to weird places before. Had it happen in a car, and on a train too. People get caught up in that kind of thing. It's not as rare as you'd think, actually. There are more of us than anyone admits. At least that's what I think. But the time I noticed something was wrong was when I was on the train. That one still makes my stomach tighten when I remember it. I woke up from a light doze, with this uncomfortable sense that something didn't match. Outside the window was countryside, Inaka, and somehow, it even felt a little retro, like the world had been dialed back a few decades, if you know what I mean. I was on a regular train heading from Nagoya Station towards Maibara. For a second I thought, is this around Sekigahara? Because the view was that rural. Wide fields, low houses. It's an empty looking place if you ask me. Something wasn't right though. I'd never seen this scenery before, not once. And that line isn't exactly unfamiliar to me. Even half asleep, I should have been able to place it roughly. Instead, I couldn't even guess. No landmarks, no rhythm to it, just unfamiliar. I couldn't help but keep staring out of the window. Like if I stared long enough, my brain would snap it back into a normal explanation. But it didn't. Something was off. For one thing, I couldn't even see any kind of side road at all. Normally, even out in the sticks, you get something running along the tracks. An access road, a narrow public lane, a little strip where the maintenance trucks go. I told myself, well, maybe not always. Maybe I'm overthinking it. But even if you forgive that, there was still the way the track itself existed. It looked forced. Like someone had laid rails down, the way a kid dumps a toy train set on the floor. No proper planning, no natural curve, just there, pressed into the land, too straight in places, too sharp in others. No sense of engineering. And I didn't even get the luxury of thinking about it properly, because I noticed something worse, something that made my chest go cold. There was no elevated structure, no viaducts, no concrete supports, and there were no overhead lines, no power cables, no poles, nothing. But this was a normal local train, not some museum piece, not a diesel rattler on a tourist line. So what the hell was it running on? What was feeding it? How was it moving like this? I tried to force my brain to produce a sensible answer, and it just wouldn't. Every path of logic dead-ended. It felt like the rails had suddenly appeared on top of the land, and the train was being made to run across them empty. That's the closest comparison I've got. Like the world hadn't finished rendering properly. But the train didn't care. The scenery outside was a kind of view you would see if you were walking along a narrow path between rice fields and azemichi, and you were half daydreaming and not focusing on anything in particular. Just flat farmland, bits of scrub, the occasional line of trees, except it didn't behave like a normal view from a train. It was a landscape full of things your eyes kept catching, then immediately wanting to look away from. Like it wasn't for this angle. Like I was seeing something I wasn't meant to see through the window, and the viewpoint was too low. That was another part of it. Even though I was sitting in an ordinary seat, it felt like the train was running at a height that didn't make any sense. Like the bottom of the carriage was almost brushing the ground. The horizon sat wrong in the frame. I knew in a blunt, animal way, staying on this train was a bad idea. Not a maybe, not anxiety, it was certainty. Even if you don't believe in instincts, I'm telling you, anyone would have understood it. Anyone in my position would know how I felt. And then I looked around the carriage. Everyone, every single passenger was asleep. All of them. Mouths slightly open, faces slack, like someone had pulled the plug out of the room. And it wasn't just that they were sleeping. It was that there was no movement at all. No shifting, no fidgeting, no hand twitching when the train jolts. They looked like props, like something pretending to be passengers. That image scared me more than the scenery did. There's something deeply wrong about a train full of people with the same empty, drained expression, all frozen in that same kind of rest. At some point, without me even noticing the moment it happened, the train had stopped. We were at what looked like a station. I could tell from the platform shape, the way the light fell. But the doors didn't open. No chime, no announcements. Just no mechanical whine. No nothing. The train just stopped. Panic hit hard. I stood up and moved into the next carriage as fast as I could without fully breaking into a run. And then, the door between carriages was open. More accurately, it was normal. The next carriage was completely ordinary. The air felt different. The light looked like it belonged there. There were people, awake people, sitting in natural postures, holding phones, looking bored, looking human. The usual noises of a train returned. Fabric rubbing, a tiny cough, the faint click of someone's scream. I glanced back, and even the carriage I'd just been in looked normal again, like the wrong version had never existed. And suddenly I had this ridiculous urge to go back to my original seat. Because it looked fine now. Because it looked safe now. Because if I sat down, maybe none of this would count. I hesitated. I genuinely did not know what to do. And here's a detail that makes me hate myself when I remember it. I'd recently caused a rear-end crash because I'd dozed off while driving. Nothing dramatic, but bad enough to shake me. Bad enough that my head was still full of, I need to be careful, I need to do things properly. So part of me wanted to get to where I was going without any drama, without making a scene, without creating another incident. I wanted to stay on the train and just reach my destination like a normal person. And while I stood there, stuck in that confusion, the doors closed. And the normal scenery inside the carriage, those little human sounds, atmosphere vanished like someone had flicked a switch. The few passengers scattered around the carriage looked instantly like they were dead. Not in a gore way, just drained of life, eyes shut, faces heavy, no warmth. I realized immediately, I messed up. I picked the wrong moment. I hesitated when I shouldn't have. Without thinking, I turned towards the window, desperate for any option, anything. Like maybe I could pry one open, or force it, or jump out at the platform edge while we were still near it. And then I saw outside, and my body locked up. The train was already moving. No, not just moving. It was flying. And it was going the wrong way. We were running backwards at an insane speed. The scenery smeared. The air inside felt thicker. The pressure had changed. The vibration wasn't the usual rattle of tracks. It was this deep, aggressive shaking that made your teeth feel loose. And the passengers, those people who hadn't moved at all, they were all awake now, and every one of them was staring in the same direction. Not looking around, not reacting to the speed, just fixed on a single point as if they were watching something approach. And their clothes had changed. The neat shirts and summer outfits were gone. Now they were dressed in grimy, worn clothing, like work clothes, faded, stained, the sort you'd wear on a job site. Some looked like they had dust on their sleeves. Some had collars that had gone soft with age. They didn't look like commuters anymore. They looked like people who had been, for want of a better word, used up. And as I stared, the area they were watching, the forward direction we used to be traveling, started to darken. At first, it was like a bruise spreading across the landscape, and then it turned into something heavier, thicker, like the world ahead was being swallowed by ink. It wasn't a tunnel, it wasn't nightfall. It was a big black thing that didn't belong to weather or geography, and it was eating everything it touched. I tried to run towards the back carriage. In my head it was simple, get as far away from that dark as possible. But the shaking was so violent, and my legs felt like they were stuck in mud. I could move, but only in slow, stubborn steps. Like I was wading through something that didn't want me to leave my spot. And the passengers, they didn't change their expression at all. They were like photographs, faces frozen, stiff shoulders. Except their mouths were moving now. Not shouting, Not panicking, just endless working, forming the same shapes over and over as if they were reciting something. I couldn't make out the words at first because the train noise was too loud and the vibration stole the rhythm from everything. But I could tell they were saying something, together like a chant that had been started long ago and nobody remembered how to stop. I lost it. I don't remember deciding to scream. I just remember the sound coming out of me, raw, useless. Like I imagine an animal might sound cornered in a trap. I kept forcing my body forward, step by step, grabbing seat backs when the shaking hit. Harder, stumbling, swallowing bile, refusing to look too long at that spreading black, and somehow I reached the very last carriage. Nothing changed. The darkness was still coming, filling up the view like it was closing the distance without needing to move like a normal thing. It was just simply replacing the world. I kept yelling at it, at the dark, at the train, at whatever was doing this, because there was nothing else I could do. No lever, no emergency handle that mattered in a place like this. And right at the instant the black swallowed everything, I'm not even sure if I heard it with my ears or it landed directly in my head, but I swear I heard a voice say, "Kuzureru, Kuzureru. It's collapsing. It's collapsing." Then, I woke up. And I was back on the same train, still running through that unnatural space, getting out of it, getting back to a place that felt properly real. I was genuinely hard. I'm not going to pretend that I escaped in one clean moment. It took everything I had. When I finally snapped back properly, the outside scenery was normal again. Houses, roads, power lines, the kind of boring view you forget instantly. I got off at the next stop and sat on a bench until my hands stopped shaking. I told myself it was just exhaustion, a stress dream, the brain doing stupid things on the rails. I don't know. But when I checked my phone, there was only one thing I couldn't explain. The step counter was high. Ridiculously high. It was like I'd been pacing around for hours and my palms were raw. As if I'd been gripping seat backs hard enough to tear skin. I still take that line sometimes, but I don't sleep on trains anymore. Not even for a minute. This happened fairly recently, only about 6 years ago, around the same time of year. I went camping and fishing with two friends, Hiroshi and Takumi. There was an actual campground in the area. We decided to set up closer to a pond. We wanted to fish. Near the edge of the pond stood a small rural shrine, and beside it there was a quiet patch of ground where people sometimes pitched tents. We figured it would be more convenient to stay there, so we set up our tents at the corner of the shrine grounds, close enough to reach the pond easily in the morning. The three of us had brought solo tents, so one each. We spent the evening fishing, grilling meat, and drinking a bit while talking about nothing in particular. Those are the best kind of nights. Since we planned to wake up early the next day to go fishing again, we turned in pretty early. After a long day outdoors, sleep came quickly. At some point during the night, I heard someone calling. "Hey! Hey!" I opened my eyes, and I knew that voice belonged to my friend, Hiroshi. My mind was still foggy with sleep when he whispered urgently, "Quiet, listen. Do you hear that?" I held my breath again. At first, all I noticed was the usual nighttime sounds. Crickets, leaves moving gently in the breeze, and the distant rustle of water near the pond. But then I heard it. A sharp metallic sound like metal being struck against something hard. It carried through the forest, faint but distinct, blending strangely with the sounds of the bugs chirping in the night. I checked my phone and it was just after 3 a.m. The sound seemed to be coming from behind the shrine, deeper in the cedar forest that spread out beyond it. I bet that the sound had woken Takumi as well, but when Hiroshi and I looked towards his tent, something was wrong. Takumi wasn't inside it. We called his name quietly. No answer. At no point did we really know what to think. Maybe he'd gone to the bathroom. Maybe he heard the noise too and gone to check it out. Either way, leaving him out there, alone, didn't quite feel right. So Hiroshi and I decided to head towards the sound, but carefully. We passed the shrine building and moved towards the forest. Once we reached the edge of the cedar grove, the sound became clearer. It echoed softly through the trees. We stepped onto a narrow animal trail leading up the slope behind the shrine, and neither of us spoke. We moved slowly, trying to not make a sound. The forest was thick with tall cedar trunks. Their branches blocked out most of the sky, leaving the path dim and uneven. After climbing maybe 200 meters and resisting the urge to just turn back, my eyes had finally adjusted to the darkness, and that's when we saw Takumi. He was crouched by one of those tall cedar trees ahead of us. He had his back pressed against the trunk, almost like he was trying to disappear into it. Takumi noticed us and immediately raised a finger to his lips, and then he motioned us closer. Hiroshi and I crept forward, trying to stay low. When we reached him, Takumi was drenched in sweat. His breathing was shallow and his eyes were fixed on something further up the trail. He pointed a shaky finger. About 30 meters ahead, in the small clearing between the trees, there was a young woman. She stood facing a tree, and she was hammering something into it. At first I couldn't understand what I was looking at, but then the shape became a little clearer. A straw doll. She was holding what looked like a stone and using it to drive a long nail through the doll and into the trunk of the cedar tree. Each strike produced that metallic sound we'd been hearing. Between the blows, we could hear her muttering something under her breath. Even from that distance, fragments of her words drifted through the forest. They sounded like curses, words filled with bitterness and hatred. All three of us understood what we were witnessing. It was the Ushinokokumaeri ritual, the old Hour of the Ox curse ritual, where someone goes to a shrine in the dead of night and nails a straw effigy to the tree while calling ruin down on the person they want to destroy. Technically, we knew she was just another person, but seeing someone perform something like that alone in the middle of the forest at 3 in the morning, that was something else. The atmosphere around her felt heavy and wrong. Not one of us wanted to stay there, and without saying it loud, we all reached the same conclusion. We needed to leave quickly and quietly. So we started backing away the way we came, slowly, carefully. But just as we were about to turn, the woman stopped, and then she spoke. "Who's there?" Her voice cut sharply through the forest. She turned towards us. Until then, we had only seen her from behind, and now her face was visible. Her expression was twisted with rage. But before any of us could react, she screamed, and she started running straight towards us. And that was enough. All three of us turned and ran. We didn't stop to pack anything. No tents, no gear, we just ran. The campground was about 1 kilometer away, and we sprinted the entire distance. It's a miracle we didn't trip over any of the forest floor. But by the time we reached it, we were gasping for breath. We explained the situation to the campground staff, and they let us stay in the manager's office until the morning. Not one of us slept, though, and when daylight finally arrived, and people started moving around the campground, we worked up the courage to go back to the shrine. That was at about 8 a.m., I think. The place looked completely normal. The woman was gone. After what we experienced, not one of us felt like fishing anymore. We decided to pack everything up and go home. so we loaded our gear into the car and got ready to leave. Then suddenly Takumi shouted from the back seat, "Whoa!" Hiroshi and I turned around. Takumi was staring upward, pointing at the roof of the car with his mouth hanging open. I followed his finger and line of sight, and I saw 3 metal points protruding from the ceiling, 3 5-inch nails. We got out of the car and looked at the roof. There were 3 straw dolls nailed neatly in a row into the metal. For a while, none of us said anything. It was broad daylight. Birds were calling. Somewhere nearby, I could hear happy campers laughing as they packed up their own gear. That seemed normal. Everything around us felt normal, and that kind of made things worse, to be honest, because whatever happened in those woods only a few hours earlier clearly hadn't stayed there. We pulled the dolls out, but none of us wanted to touch them for long. Hiroshi wrapped them in an old towel and threw them away at the campground before we left. Even then, it didn't feel like enough. I've had time to think about that a little bit, and I really think we should have gone to the shrine and tried to dispose of them properly, but can't go back now. On the drive home, nobody spoke. I remember looking at my reflection in the passenger side window and thinking the same thought over and over. If the ritual was meant for someone else, then why were there 3 dolls on our car? Maybe she cursed us for seeing her. Maybe we ruined whatever she was trying to do and she decided to pass it on to us instead. Or maybe the curse had already started the moment we stood there watching. I still think about it. Nothing dramatic ever really happened after that, not in the way that, horror stories go. None of us died, no one went missing, but even now, 6 years later, I've never been able to completely shake the feeling that something followed us out of those trees. And sometimes I kind of wonder if the real curse isn't bad luck or death. Maybe it's just knowing there are some things in this world you're better off never seeing. This is a story my grandfather once told me. Back when he was a child, there was an old woman in his village. People called her Ume. Something about her had never been right. Ume had originally lived with her son and his wife, but when they built a new house and moved away, she stayed behind. She insisted that she didn't want to leave the village where she'd been born, but villagers whispered a different explanation. They said that she'd been left behind because she had become a burden. After that, something in her seemed to break. At first, she only behaved strangely. One moment, she could hold a normal conversation, the next, she would suddenly leap at someone and bite their arm. Not just a nip either. She bit hard enough to tear flesh. When it happened several times, the rumors began. People said that she might be eating human flesh. My grandfather, still a child then, asked why nobody called the police. The adults had an answer for that. If a mad person comes from this village, they said, it would shame the entire village. Instead of reporting her, they tried to hide her existence from outsiders. Ume stopped bathing. Her hair tangled into thick knots. She wandered barefoot through the village, giving off a sour smell that people could detect before they even saw her. Little by little, she stopped looking like a person. Whenever villagers walked outside, they carried tools, sickles, knives, anything with a blade. If Ume came too close, they threatened her. Take another step and we'll cut you down. One day, several children were playing together when Ume attacked them. One of the boys lost his little finger. His parents stormed to her house in a rage and beat her with sticks. No one tried to stop them. One of the adults said later that the boy's father had shouted, "She was biting on my child's finger like it was something delicious." After that, the village made a decision. They locked Ume inside a small hut at the edge of the village. The hut was wrapped in rope and wire, and the door was secured with a heavy lock. Once a day, someone threw food through a window. There was no toilet. Someone even said, when she dies, we'll just burn the hut with her inside. The adults told the children to never go anywhere near the place. But still, one day, my grandfather went there with his father to deliver food. As they approached the hut, the smell hit them. A thick, rotting stench. From inside came a wet chewing sound. Someone muttered in disgust that she was probably eating her own waste again. My grandfather tossed in a bunch of rice balls through a small window, and they turned and began walking away, and from behind them came a voice. "You heartless people. You heartless people." A few days later, one of my grandpa's friends told him something disturbing. They had overheard the adults talking, and they said that Ume had begun eating her own body. According to what they said, she had already lost an arm. The boys went to see the hut themselves, but when they got close, a low growling sound came from inside, and they ran. The adults began saying Ume was no longer human. "She's tasted human flesh," someone said. "That thing in the hut is a monster." My grandfather tried asking his parents what was really happening, but they only told him that children didn't need to know. One night, several adults gathered at his house. He and a friend listened from the stairs, but couldn't understand all that much. The only phrase they heard repeated was, "Surely, enough is enough now." The next morning, his father told him not to leave the house. "There's a ritual for the gods today," he said. "Children of the village mustn't see it." But from the second floor window, my grandfather noticed smoke rising near Ume's hut at the edge of the village. When he told his father, he was scolded and told it was just farmers burning the fields, burning waste. After that, children were forbidden to go anywhere near the area. Later, when my grandfather and a friend sneaked back to take a look, the hut was gone. Sometime afterwards, a rumor spread. One of the boys in the village said that Ume's spirit had begun knocking on the door of his house every night. My grandfather told his father about this, and his father replied calmly, "When people die, sometimes they wander back for a while. Once 49 days pass, they move on." But there was a reason why the spirit kept returning to that house. The boy's father had been chosen by the lot to help burn the hut. People said that was why the spirit held a grudge. Villagers started referring to the knocking presence with a strange word, ibushi. It was a local term. My grandfather believed it simply meant ghost. The adults warned everyone never to talk about Ume to outsiders. If you spoke about her, the spirit might come to you next. Eventually, the boy's family became so exhausted by the nightly knocking that they asked my grandfather's family for help. They moved into his house temporarily. That night, my grandfather lay awake beside his friend. The adults were drinking downstairs, and then came a sound, a heavy pounding, like someone was striking the door with both hands. At the same time, the voices downstairs stopped. My grandfather knew what it was. Ume had come. He shook his friend awake, and the two of them went downstairs. The adults were whispering among themselves. When my grandfather asked what was happening, his father only said, "Don't worry about it, go back to bed." The adults resumed drinking like nothing had happened. The next morning, the food offerings hanging by the doorway were gone. Those were part of a ritual to keep spirits away. They hung things like dried squid, rice cakes, fruit, because the villagers believed that the spirits would take the food instead of entering the house. This continued for several weeks. Then the knocking sound stopped. The adults said that 49 days had passed. Only after did the villagers build Ume's grave. They refused to build it in a place with their ancestors, though. Instead, they built it alone near the river. A crude marker from a few wooden boards, no fence or protection. Just standing there beside the water. When the rains came, the river flooded. The grave washed away in less than a month. The villagers said that it couldn't be helped. Once it was gone, and people would forget. That was the way things were handled there. My grandfather later said something that stayed with me. What frightened him most wasn't Ume. It was the villagers. The way an entire community could quietly decide that one person no longer belonged among them. He said that if he had grown up there and never left, he might have become the same as them. And that thought scared him more than any ghost story ever could. Recently, I heard someone talking about elderly people dying, about lonely deaths in big cities. For some reason, that reminded me of something from my childhood, and once that memory came back, I couldn't sleep, so I figured I'd come here and write it down. This is about the time I saw something called Osagami Sama. When I was a kid, both of my parents worked full-time. Because of that, I often ended up spending afternoons in the house of a man who lived nearby. I called him Uncle Masato, even though he wasn't exactly my uncle. We weren't related at all. We just happened to meet one day at the local park, and after that I started stopping by his place to hang out. Masato had lost his fiancée to illness years earlier, and had lived alone ever since. Maybe because of that he treated me kindly. I remember how he used to talk with me, listen to whatever nonsense a kid had to say, and sometimes let me help with small things around the house. Thinking back now, he treated me almost like I was his own child. One day, while we were sitting around talking, he suddenly said something strange, quietly, almost to himself. He said, Osagami Sama would be coming soon. According to him, Osagami Sama was a yokai. It was about the height of a child. It had long hair and narrow eyes, and it never spoke. Instead, it simply followed people. If you ran, it ran. If you turned corner after corner trying to lose it, it would still be there. Each time you looked back, it would be closer than before. If you shouted at it to stop following you, it would just stare back without changing its expression. But if you tried approaching it yourself, something strange would happen. It would move away, always keeping the exact same distance, no matter how much you tried to close that distance. I asked him, what would happen if it caught up to you? He said that he didn't know. Apparently, Osagami Sama never approached people who had families. Most of the people around Masato were either married or had children, so nobody he knew had actually seen it. At least that's what he said. Then he looked around the room for a moment and said something that stuck with me. Right now it's probably nearby, he said. Since you're here, it's hiding. I glanced around. I have to admit I was genuinely freaked out. The small living room looked exactly the same as always. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. I could hear the faint sound of a bicycle passing somewhere down the street and the dry rustling of leaves in the roadside gutter. And I didn't see anything. At the time, the story only felt like a creepy ghost tale, but by the time I got home, the fear had almost faded. I remember thinking that maybe he had just been teasing me. A few days later, I went back to visit him again, and that was when things started to feel wrong. Masato was standing there, in his yard, when I arrived. He was shaking, not just slightly either. His whole body was trembling, like someone standing out in the cold too long. I walked up to him and I called out. The moment he noticed me, he turned with a look I've never seen on his face before, and screamed. He stumbled backwards several steps, staring at me like he was looking at something dangerous. But then he realized it was me. He calmed down a little, though the tension never really left him. His eyes kept drifting past me toward the street and the narrow path between the houses. Under his breath, he kept repeating the same thing. Osagami-sama's coming. Osagami-sama's coming. When I tried to talk with him, He told me he'd already gone to both temples and shrines. None of them could help him. He said he was certain he would be caught by it that night. As a kid, I was trying to think of ways to help. What if he stayed at somebody else's house? What if he slept somewhere crowded? But he told me the people he knew didn't believe in Osagami Sama. Even if he stayed somewhere without explaining why, he could only manage a night or two before questions started. And there was nothing I could do either. There was no way a child like me could suddenly invite a grown man to stay at my house. And even if I asked my parents to let me stay at his place, they would never allow me to sleep over at the home of a man who wasn't even my relative. I actually tried. I called them to ask, and they said no immediately. Before long, evening arrived, and I had to go home. Masato seemed to understand that, and with a tired smile, he said everything would be fine, and he told me, "Don't worry, go on home." But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. After my parents fell asleep, I quietly slipped out of the house and walked over to Masato's place. The front door was closed, so I went toward the yard, hoping to see inside, and that's when I noticed a small gap in the curtains. I leaned forward and looked through. Inside the room, Masato was lying down, and something else was there. Osagami Sama. It looked exactly like how he described it. Long hair, narrow eyes. Its height was slightly shorter than mine at the time, but because the room was dark, I couldn't make out every detail. But it didn't seem to be wearing clothes. It was sitting on top of Masato's body. The creature had a faint smile on its face, as if it was enjoying itself. And Masato wasn't moving at all. I could see his face clearly, but there was no sign that he was conscious. A terrible feeling rushed through me, and without thinking, I started pounding on the window and shouting his name. But the only one who reacted was Osagami Sama. Slowly it turned its head towards me, and for a brief second it just stared. Then it moved. It rushed towards the curtain with incredible speed. The expression on its face had completely changed. The smile was gone, and in its place was something filled with pure hatred, an expression so twisted, it's hard to describe even now. So I ran. I backed away from the window, stumbled through the yard, and sprinted towards the street. Right as I reached the road, a police officer on a patrol grabbed me, and from his point of view, it must have looked like a child busting out of someone's yard in the middle of the night. He grabbed my arm and started demanding explanations. By then, I was half hysterical. I remember shouting things like, "Osagami Sama" and "Masato." The officer took me back to Masato's house. He rang the doorbell, but there was no response. Because I kept insisting about the yard, he took me around there as well. Nothing. Of course, he didn't look through the window like I had. He probably assumed I had been playing a prank at a neighbor's house, and eventually he took me back home. That night, my parents scolded me so harshly, and I barely slept. I just kept thinking about Masato and what I had seen through the window. The next morning, the same officer came round to our house. Masato had been found dead. They said the cause was unclear. The officer described the body in a strange way. He said it looked as if all of the man's vitality had been drained of him. Apparently the officer had remembered how strangely I had behaved the night before, so he stopped by the house again that morning just to check. And that's when they discovered the body. I told him everything that happened. How much of it he believed, I still don't know. Even now, I can't say whether Osagami Sama really existed. Maybe Masato had simply been losing his mind. Maybe I imagined what I saw. It was late, wasn't it? And I'd been told this story, and I was young. But one thing that's never faded is the memory of that thing rushing towards the window with that expression. I can still see that very clearly in my mind. The only comforting thought is that I eventually grew up and built a happy family of my own. Because, according to Masato, my friend from the park, Osagami Sama doesn't approach people who have families. It was around 11 that night when the three of us ended up there. Me, Naoki, and Ryo. People in our area knew the place. It was a suicide hotspot along the coast. If you drove a couple of hours towards the Pacific and stayed on the shoreline long enough, you came to a bend where the guardrail gave out and the land pushed over the sea. And that's when it dropped hard into the rocks below. The water beyond them looked black at that hour. It was the kind of place nobody would expect rescue. Everybody called it the Cape of Taking Someone With You. That was the only name I ever heard of it. We left the car at a nearby rest area and walked the rest of the way. On the way up, Ryo kept going over the rumors he'd heard. Not in a tidy way, more like the way people talk when they want something strange to happen but just don't want to admit it. Creating atmosphere, I guess, is what I mean. Supposedly, people came there and were suddenly overcome with the urge to jump. In some versions of the story, if someone tried to stop them, the one trying to help was the one who ended up dead. And that was the version he knew. Naoki, who had driven us there, had already looked tired of the whole thing and muttered that the one getting dragged into it was the real victim. And that was really how the night begun for us. When we reached the cliff, the place looked worse than I imagined. There was streetlight nearby, but it barely lit anything. It spread a thin, washed-out light over the rail and the concrete without making the place look safer. Down below, the sea kept striking the rocks with that heavy sound you only get when you know how steep the drop is. There wasn't anybody there. Ryo climbed over the guardrail almost straight away and went near the edge to look down, and I told him to stop fooling around, but he just ignored me. Naoki sat on the rail with a bottle in his hand, and he just looked like he wished he stayed at home. After a while, Ryo came back and joked about whether either of us had started to feel suicidal yet, and I said no. Naoki said that he felt like going home. Ryo wanted to stay a little longer. He dragged us all the way there, and didn't want to leave empty-handed, so to speak, so we stayed. We sat on the guardrail with our legs hanging down towards the cliffside, and I remember looking up at the sky every so often. Naoki had his eyes shut. It looked like he might fall asleep sitting there. Ryo got a bit restless after a while, and said he was going back down to the toilet. Then he left. For a few minutes it was just me and Naoki. I found myself thinking about that strange rumor again, whether places like that really got into people's heads, or whether people brought something with them and pinned it on the place afterwards. Then Naoki spoke. He said the name again. The Cape of Taking Someone With You. I asked what he meant. He said that the story didn't sit right with him. One person tries to jump, someone else reaches out, and somehow the one trying to help is the one who dies. And a little later, I heard footsteps behind us. It was Ryo. At least that's what I thought. He was coming back up the slope, but the way he moved felt really off. Not drunk exactly. Not ill, just off. His head was down, and when I called to him he didn't answer. He stepped over the guardrail, passed between me and Naoki, and kept walking towards the point of the cliff. That part is still very clear in my head. His back, the drop in front of him, and the sea below. I called his name again and went to grab him. But before I got there, Naoki caught me by the shoulder and told me not to go. I said, "What do you mean? That's Ryo." He said, "No, it isn't." I remember pushing back for a moment because from behind it looked exactly right. Same clothes, same height, same build. Who else would be out here with us? Even the way it moved was close enough that I wanted to believe him. Then Naoki asked me what time it was, and I checked my watch. 11:40. He said, "Right, then that isn't him." I still didn't understand what he was talking about. I just stood there looking at that figure on the cliff. Then it turned around. Not its body, only its head. That was enough. Its face was Ryo's, but the smile wasn't. The cheeks were pulled into a shape that didn't belong to a human face. The expression had been copied without any kind of understanding what it was for. And the second I saw it, I knew my friend Naoki had been right. It wasn't Ryo. It looked at us for a second, and then it went over, still smiling as it went. There was no splash. Nothing hit the rocks. There was no sound at all. It was there, and then it wasn't. For a moment I stayed where I was. Naoki stepped forward looking down, then said there was nothing there. Nothing floating, nothing moving. Then he told me Ryo was fine, and to come with him. And we went straight back to the toilets, and there he was, face down on the floor, in front of the sinks, asleep, passed out, call it whatever you want. Finding him there didn't make the rest of it feel any less real. Naoki woke him up by tapping the side of his head a few times. Ryo sat up, looking dazed, asking where he was and why his body hurt. He reacted the exact way he always did, loud, irritated, asking questions. Before he was even fully awake, it was him all right. There was no doubt about that. We left almost instantly. But before we did, Naoki turned his back towards the sink, walked up to the mirror and smashed it with the bottom of his plastic bottle. The glass burst into cracks, and neither of us really asked why he did that. On the way back after Ryo had fallen asleep, I asked Naoki how he knew, and he said it was the watch. Ryo always wore a watch on his right wrist. The thing on the cliff had it on his left, and when Naoki looked closely, the watch face was upside down. 12:20, a mirror of 11:40, I guess. And that was enough for him. I asked if that was why he broke the mirror, and he said no. He said he just didn't want to keep looking at his own face after what we'd seen. I never believed that. I also asked whether we should have called the police. He said nobody had died, Ryo was alive, and we had nothing anybody would believe if we tried to explain it. Maybe he was right, but maybe he wasn't. But there was one more thing he said on the drive home that stayed with me. He said that if I had managed to grab that thing by the shoulder when I reached out, it might have taken me over with it. That was the moment the name finally settled into place for me. The cape of taking someone with you. Maybe it wasn't only about people arriving there already wanting to jump. Maybe something at that cliff wanted company. Naoki yawned after saying that. Ryo mumbled something in his sleep from the back seat. And I sat there listening to the tires on the road and the engine under us. And for the first time that night, I felt really grateful to be in the car, still alive. A little later, Naoki joked that he was tired enough to crash and take both of us with him. He probably didn't mean anything by that, right? Still, I didn't laugh. I don't have any psychic abilities. I've never seen a ghost, I've never heard disembodied voices, but when I was in the second year of middle school, I had one experience that still unsettles me when I think about it. That year my father died in a traffic accident. My mother and I moved to her childhood home. My grandfather had passed away long before that, so it just became the three of us, my grandma, my mother, and me. I was still in shock of losing my dad, and on top of that I was starting at a new school. I was anxious, withdrawn, not really sure how to exist in that new version of my life. But my classmates welcomed me warmly, especially one girl, Sachiko. She let me look at her textbooks, she showed me around the school, talked to me after classes. and as I grew closer to Sachiko, I gradually opened up to others too. Within 2 months, I felt like I truly belonged, and there was another girl in the class called Fumi. Even from another girl's perspective, Fumi was undeniably cute. Small, delicate, the kind of girl who makes you instinctively want to protect her. By coincidence, we ended up in the same group after a seat exchange, and that's when we started talking more. I found out she also lived with just her mother. In my case, it was because my father had died. In hers, it was divorce. Still, I felt a sense of closeness, like we shared something unspoken. I wanted to get closer to her. That feeling lasted until the day I went to her house. One day, I went to visit Fumi's house. I don't remember why. It was a long time ago. But more than that, what I saw was so overwhelming that the smaller details faded. The reason I went doesn't matter. The memory of that room erased everything else. Sachiko came too. To be honest, Sachiko didn't seem to like Fumi very much. I didn't think she was thrilled that I had become close to her. I don't remember why she decided to come with us anyway. But the two of us went over to Fumi's house. Fumi's house was old. It was a single-story wooden house. The exterior walls were warped slightly with age. The house stood alone, but there was barely any gap between it and the neighboring house. No garden, no space, just narrow air pressed between structures. It felt dated, worn, old. But my grandmother's house wasn't much different, and being a single mother household, maybe things were tight financially. That's what I thought. Fumi greeted us at the entrance, and we stepped inside. A beautiful woman came out from a room deeper inside the house. She bowed deeply to me and Sachiko. She was holding laundry, towels, undergarments, like she had just brought them in. She looked happy. Later I thought maybe that was because Fumi rarely brought friends home. Fumi had mentioned that she didn't usually invite people over. When I entered Fumi's room, I was surprised. Given the age of the house, I imagined her room would look plain, maybe worn out, maybe a little lonely. But it was bright. Colorful beddings, stuffed animals neatly arranged on shelves, small decorations. It was far more girlish than I expected. Carefully curated. Except for one thing. In the corner of the room, a man was stood there, watching us. No, not a man actually. A male mannequin. I could still see it clearly. Because it was a mannequin, of course its face was perfectly formed. Symmetrical, smooth, and that made it worse. Its eyes, lifeless, fixed, were directed straight at us. It stood with its arms bent outward, either side forming a W shape, spread slightly from its sides. It was wearing a bright red sweatshirt and a hat. The clothes looked expensive, more expensive than what her mother had been wearing. Sachiko and I just stared. Fumi didn't react at all. She walked over to the mannequin casually and adjusted the angle of its hat. That simple, natural movement sent a shiver across my skin. And then she said, "Isn't he handsome?" Her voice carried no emotion, no happiness. Not happiness, not embarrassment, not playfulness, just flat, like a statement being read. At that moment, her mother entered the room carrying cake and tea. "Welcome, I'm so glad you came," she said. The tension in the air eased slightly. Sachiko took the plates and arranged them on the table. I moved to help, and then I noticed something. There were 4 servings, 4 slices of cake, 4 cups of tea. I thought maybe her mother was going to join us, but she smiled gently and placed one of the plates on Fumi's desk, right beside the mannequin. Fumi stared at it, but I could only see the back of her head, her hair. Then she suddenly turned towards us and began eating her cake like nothing was strange. That's when the thought hit me clearly. I've come somewhere I shouldn't have. They were treating it like a person, dressing it in expensive clothes, serving it cake, but neither of them spoke to it. If they believed it was human, why wouldn't they introduce him? The half measure made things worse. My shirt clung to my back with sweat. This house is weird. I tried desperately to push that thought away. I searched for something ordinary to talk about. In the corner of the room there was a bird cage. If I focused on something normal, maybe the room would feel normal too. "Do you have a bird?" I asked. "It's gone," Fumi said quickly. "Oh, I see. Yeah, I didn't need it anymore." Didn't need it anymore. The phrasing disturbed me. There was no affection in her voice, no sadness. I wanted to leave. I had had enough. If I stayed any longer, I felt like something inside me would start to shift too. Sachiko stood up. "I'm gonna use the bathroom." "It's down the hall. Go outside, then right there," Fumi replied. Sachiko left. I felt a flicker of irritation. Maybe she was planning on escaping alone. Now I was stuck here with these two. There was nothing else left to say. Every reply from Fumi felt slightly off, just a little shorter than usual. I kept my eyes down. I didn't want to look around. Only a few minutes passed, but it felt stretched. Then I heard footsteps running down the hallway. Sachiko re-entered the room. Her face was pale. "Sorry, let's go home," she said. She didn't look at Fumi. She kept her eyes locked on mine. "We'll come back," Fumi said. The wording was wrong. Sachiko grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the door. I felt like screaming. Even then I felt obligated to say goodbye to Fumi's mother. I couldn't look directly at her, but I saw that the sliding door to the adjacent room was slightly open. Excuse us, we're leaving," I called out. At that exact moment, a hand shot up from inside the room and slammed the sliding door shut. Hard, it echoed in my ears. We ran without speaking. Sachiko didn't slow down. She ran like she wanted distance, physical distance, as quickly as possible. And when we finally reached somewhere that felt safe enough to stop, we caught our breath. And then she spoke. "Stop hanging out with Fumi. The house is weird. Fumi is weird, but her mother's worse." Her voice was trembling. And she told me what happened. When she left the room earlier, the sliding door next to the hallway had been slightly open. As she passed by, she glanced inside. There were 4 or 5 mannequin arms scattered on the floor. And sitting on a cushion nearby was Fumi's mother, licking one of the mannequin arms. Not gently, obsessively. Sachiko forced herself to use the bathroom. On her way back, she glanced inside again. This time, Fumi's mother was staring directly at her, and her eyes were empty. Like the mannequins, the arms were gone, and in their place was a pile of laundry. Without thinking, Sachiko muttered, Where's the mannequin?" Fumi's mum didn't answer. She just smiled. After that day, I stopped speaking to Fumi unless necessary. I considered telling everyone, but who would believe me? I asked some of her closest friends indirectly if they'd ever seen anything strange at her house, but they said no. It's been over 10 years now. I can look back more calmly, I guess. I still don't know what it was. If they wanted to hide the mannequin, why show it to both of us? Why let Sachiko see that room? There's something else I think about too. I've never seen a mannequin posed with its arms bent into a W shape. Clothes wouldn't fit it properly, right? But that red sweatshirt, that fit perfectly, like it had been put on by the mannequin itself. That's everything I can remember about my time at Fumi's house.